My vision is like looking through less than a 3mm pinhole. So when I was younger, it was like looking through a toilet paper roll. You lose your peripheral vision and you only have your central vision. And as it progresses, it just closes in like a tight tunnel until it's a straw to a pinpoint, and for a lot of people, they lose it all. Fortunately for me, I've maintained what little vision that I have. I've maintained it since 2004. I am Jamie Dennis, and I'm a seminarian for the Diocese of Owensboro, Kentucky, and I'm from the great thriving metropolis of Caneyville, Kentucky. I was born in 1986 during June, and my sister had just graduated from high school. They actually put my mom on the bottom bleacher in case I decided to come out during the graduation. And my brother is a couple of years older than my sister, so I am officially the baby of the family. And so my mom and dad pretty much raised me as an only child. Caneyville is not very big. We have a dollar store, we have a little restaurant called the Dairy Barn, and we have an elementary school that probably has maybe 300 students. And it's a fairly simple place. The most excitement we have is when the traffic backs up when the trains are coming through town. I grew up on a farm. We have about 100 acres, and it's mostly woods. We have some pastures. My dad raises horses, so the horses graze there. And we have a few ponds and a lake. And it's just a beautiful place to grow up. We have over 4 miles of hiking trails. And I tell everybody, when you go to the top of our ridge, I call it a mountain, when you go to the top of our mountain at night, you can see all the lights of Caneyville, all 2 of them. Really, my mom noticed my vision loss as soon as probably 6 months old. When Mom would come into a room and call my name, sometimes I would not always reach for her in the direction that she was standing. And so Mom realized that I was night blind very early on. And that is usually the first symptom of my eye condition called retinitis pigmentosa. We didn't notice other symptoms until kindergarten. My teacher and my mom noticed that I was a little slower than the other kids, and I didn't always color within the lines or, cut with scissors right on the line. There was little things like that. But I wasn't officially diagnosed until 2nd grade, and it took a while to figure that out after several doctors' visits, MRIs, and a lot of painful eye drops. My mom and dad were terrified. They didn't know how to handle it at first. The first reaction was, what do we do? And the school system in Grayson County, their reaction was, we need to send him to the School for the Blind, which my mom and dad were terrified of that notion because that would have meant sending me away and I would only be home on the weekends, if that. And my mom and dad were of the mindset, we gave birth to him, we want to raise him. So they had a lot of anxiety and a lot of worries, a lot of fretting, but amidst all of that, they continued to try to give me the most normal life possible and keep me at home and keep me in regular school. They knew it would be a struggle, and it was a struggle, but they never gave up, and I think that has inspired me to never give up. I went to the School for the Blind for a couple of short courses just to say that I had went and experienced it. I'll be quite honest and blunt, I hated the place, and I never want to go back. It was comforting to be around other blind kids to a point. I realized I wasn't alone, that there were others that were struggling with this issue in varying degrees. However, it was kind of depressing. I could tell that some of the other kids did not have the family support that I did. I was already accustomed to being in the sighted world. I was used to my sighted classmates in elementary school, and they were used to me. And so I didn't really understand why I needed to be at this special school, because I felt like I was doing just fine at home. My mom attended school with me. She volunteered every day. She would pop in to make sure I had the large print materials. She would be the one that would make the enlargements. If she needed to, she would read to me. She made sure everything got done, because my teachers, they didn't have all the answers, and they would ask her for help, and they worked together. My teachers, especially at Caneyville Elementary, were amazing, and I'm still friends with a lot of them today. But a lot of my success was by Mom. She was there and could be there at a moment's notice. My first train experience was my Aunt Sandy. She got my first train set for me when I was probably a year and a half old for Christmas. It was tradition in her family. She was raised in California, and their tradition in their family, even the girls, would get a train set when they were growing up. I visited the Kentucky Railway Museum in New Haven, Kentucky for the first time when I was in kindergarten in 1990. The museum had just moved there from Louisville, and I just immediately became attached to the museum there. I loved the size, the sounds, the smells of these pieces of equipment. They were so much bigger than I was. And, being in the presence of the steam locomotive, Louisville-Nashville 152, it scared the daylights out of me. I mean, this big hissing, spitting thing, a machine that breathes, there's nothing else like it. And I was terrified of it, but, I liked it from a distance. And as I got older, I became much more attached to the steam engine. And around, I would say, 7 or 8 years old, my parents and I became members of the museum, and I'm still a member of the museum to this day. My love of trains has helped develop my spirituality and independence, and I firmly believe that it has helped get me to my vocation of discerning priesthood. When I volunteer at the museum, I would, give engine tours and answer questions about the equipment, and it made me a public person. And I was okay speaking in front of audiences. And of course, part of the fun with that, I can't see them to begin with, so it doesn't bother me to talk in front of a crowd. But along with that, as I got older, and especially after college and starting seminary, I use Amtrak as my primary way to travel on my own. And that has given me independence that I would have never had otherwise. My railroad on my farm, it's been a work in progress since I was in 6th grade. My dad is a retired Boilermaker from TVA, which is one of the major power plants in Kentucky and Tennessee. And we began building a railroad on our farm. We built the locomotive from the ground up, the track, everything, and we've gradually added on to it over the years. It started out with a 1/4 of a mile of track that went around a field, and now the track is almost 2 miles, and it is a full-size train. It's not one of those little things that you sit on top of and have little kids ride on. This is full-size narrow gauge, which means it's a full-size train but not as wide as a regular train. A regular train is, the distance between the rails is 4 feet 8.5 inches, and mine is about 3 feet, which is the size that used to be in the 1800s. My railroad is fundamentally, the purpose of it is to serve the church. I run the train on my own, unassisted. Since a train runs on a track, you don't need a steering wheel. And I take people for rides. I don't charge for tickets or anything. I consider it a part of my ministry. We have several shrines on our farm, one to Our Lady of Guadalupe, and my train has made a procession on her feast day for the last 6 years. If I have visiting clergy or religious, we put papal flags on the front of the engine. And usually the train's schedule revolves around the Liturgy of the Hours at the different shrines. So no matter who is visiting or riding the train stops at the appropriate times and we have liturgy. And so it's a way of evangelization. I have 2 answers for where my calling to the priesthood comes from. I think that it really started when I was probably 7 or 8 years old. I used to play Mass in the backyard on a hay bale, and I had a dog dish and a Folgers coffee can as my patent and chalice, and I would have Mass for my dogs and cats, and it was funny. The only words that I had memorized from the Mass that I would say consistently during my play Masses were the words of consecration. Take and eat, this is my body. Take and drink, this is my blood. And I didn't know why I loved those words so much. I didn't understand what they meant. I just knew that there was something special about them in my 7-year-old mind. But at the same time, I felt like I was doing something wrong. So I would always sneak and pretend to have Mass, when I thought nobody was watching, when actually my mother was watching through the window and she just thought it was precious. The other answer to where did the calling come from really starts when I started college at Brescia University in Owensboro. And I decided when I started at Brescia that I was going to learn more about the faith. I was raised Catholic, but we were not a every Sunday going family, maybe once or twice a month. And so I decided, you know what, when I'm at Brescia, I'm going to take every advantage I can of going to Mass on my own, since I can walk to the chapel on my own. So I just decided from day one to go to daily Mass every day. And I started that from day one of being on campus there. I would also go to the chapel late at night. I don't like a lot of noise, and dorm life is what it is, and there's some things that go on, loud music, whatnot. And so I would go to the chapel until quiet hours would begin. So that meant sometimes I would spend an hour, 2 hours, maybe more if I didn't have a lot of homework. And I didn't understand the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist, but I was drawn to the tabernacle. And eventually, after my own self-study, reading the Gospels, watching a little bit of Catholic television and whatnot, I realized Jesus is what is drawing me to this box. He is in this box, present in Holy Communion, reserved here. And so as I became more acquainted with Jesus and began to fall deeper in love with him, I began to question, what is it he is calling me to do in my life? I went to Brescia to get a business degree so I could work for the railroad in their offices, but I realized as I continued, I hate math. I despise business classes. I will not be happy in the business world. And so God must want me to do something else. And so I started the lay ministry program at Brescia, and I tried to make every excuse that I could to not be a priest. I tried to say, well, there's no blind priest that I know of. Eventually some priests started telling me there were. And then I said, well, I can't handle death and hard issues like that. How am I going to minister to families? My cousin Melissa was diagnosed with cancer, and she was dying. And when she died, my family asked that I speak at the end of her funeral mass, because even though I wasn't a priest, I was looked at as the minister of the family. And it was that moments after that event that I really realized God is calling me to something more than just lay ministry. Well, the main thing that I've been trying to work on in preparing for my diaconate ordination is part of the lifestyle, especially the Liturgy of the Hours. When I started seminary, I had no breviary, no Liturgy of the Hours. We had to get that brailled. And then once got that brailled, getting into that routine of praying the Psalms and getting into that lifestyle of constant prayer and reflection. It's just, I love the Psalms so much. They've become a part of me, and I can't live without them. So the prayer has been one of the primary preparations for my diaconate ordination. I have, to a point, seen God, I would say, through other people, through the sacraments especially, through His healing touch and the sacrament of the anointing of the sick, through the Eucharist. It gets to a point where words can't describe some of my experiences. I wouldn't call myself a mystic. I've had some mystical experiences. I've seen angels. I've seen demons. If you see good, you're also going to see the bad. But I wouldn't say that, my experience is better than a sighted person's. I'm just more aware. And God gives us certain mystical gifts at certain times. I'll have some kind of experience or consolation, and I'll be like, oh wow, that was amazing. And then I'll want to have that again, and it won't. It's going to happen in God's good time. He gives us what we need when we need it. I would say one thing that I can see that most sighted people can't is the inner person. When I meet someone, I'm not judging them based on their appearance. And it drives me nuts when people judge someone based on their appearance. I had a friend in college where we are still very good friends. And at the time, he was wearing, I guess you could say, the goth style, all black and, all those kind of things. And when I met him in the cafeteria one day and we just started talking, I had no clue what he looked like, and I didn't judge him based on that. We just started talking, and I enjoyed his presence. And some of my fellow ministry students would say, why are you hanging around him? And, I'm like, well, I didn't know he dressed like that. It doesn't matter to me. He's a friend, and it's going to stay that way. And so judging appearance, I think, gets us nowhere. We need to look inside the person. How are we going to be able to help people like homeless and, other marginalized people if we're just looking at their appearance? Because people are not always at their best. I don't fear darkness. I would say I'm more at home in a dark room. I love the night creatures out in the woods, and I love the silence of being in a monastery at night, or being in an old church at night, whatever. No distractions in the silence of night, in the darkness. And I think that's when God reveals Himself to us the most. And, that's another one of those situations where it's hard for me to find words to describe that experience. But I don't fear darkness. Even if I lose my vision completely, it won't bother me. My favorite thing is when the power goes out and, people are complaining, oh, the lights are out. I'm like, oh, you sighted people, always needing your precious little lights and things like that. I mean, I try to have a sense of humor. You got to. Otherwise, life is just depressing. So at the seminary, I was assigned one year to be in charge of chapel environment. And as I said, I love to pray at night. That's my prayer time, that I pray the best. And so when I was in charge of chapel environment, I would pick out the vestments for the priests for the next day. And I had a little system. I had braille labels on the hangers and things, so I knew what color was which vestment based on the label and where they were hanging at in the cabinets. They were in particular places, a certain color at each end and whatnot. And I would always go in the sacristy and close the door. And of course, since I can't see, I never turned on a light. And I would close the door and it would be locked behind me. And I would be going about my work, setting out the stole, setting out the chasuble or dalmatic. And one night I was in there and I heard the door open. And, I was in the midst of situating things. And so there was like this pause between the time the door opened. And I heard whoever it was enter and I said, "Hello." And there was this blood-curdling scream from Father Brendan Moss. He just, he was mortified. And then he realized it was me, and he proceeded to chew me out. He said, "Don't you ever do that again." And then, of course, we had to start laughing. And so I tell that story, and it tears him up. But yeah, little things like that. And I've gotten several people like that, and it's quite comical, I think. In facing a disability, you have to have a sense of humor. If you sit around and feel sorry for yourself all the time, you're not going to move on in life at all. And I would tell another blind person, especially if they were just diagnosed with, RP or macular degeneration or whatever, and there's that fear of losing their sight, you just need to prepare. It's going to be difficult, but it's not a death sentence. It may feel like that because you may have to give up some independence, and we may, at a time or another, have to rely on others for help. And that's just the reality of it. We're not alone. We need to ask for help. We need to be active and self-advocating when we can, but at the same time, we don't need to have this sense of, I can do it all on my own, because we can't. That's just the reality. There needs to be the balance between asking for help and doing it on our own. It's not easy having to plan not just your schedule of appointments and whatnot, but also scheduling drivers to drive you. That is not easy, but we have to work extra hard. We are constantly having to prove ourselves. And no, it's not fair that we have to constantly prove ourselves, but that's the reality we live in. The greatest hope that I have for being a priest is to bring the comfort of Jesus to his people through his sacraments, listening to people when they're in times of distress, just being present to his people, proclaiming the gospel. That's something our world needs. And if that means proclaiming that gospel through, God doing that through a wounded healer, as Father Henry Nouwen would say, that's how it needs to happen. Siri, what is 0 divided by 0?
Imagine that you have 0 cookies and you split them evenly among 0 friends. How many cookies does each person get? See, it doesn't make sense. And Cookie Monster is sad that there are no cookies. And you are sad that you have no friends.
Ain't that something?